Chapter 28. The weather was unusually warm for the last day of October. We didn't even need jackets. The wind was growing stronger, and Jem said it might be raining before we got home. There was no moon. The street light on the corner cast sharp shadows in the Radley house. I heard Jem laugh softly. Bet nobody bothers them tonight, he said. Jem was carrying my ham costume, rather awkwardly, as it was hard to hold. I thought it gallant of him to do so. It is a scary place, though, ain't it? I said. Boo doesn't mean anybody any harm, but I'm right glad you're along. You know Atticus wouldn't let you go to the schoolhouse by yourself. Don't see why. It's just around the corner and across the yard. The yard's a mighty long place for little girls to go across at night, Jem teased. Ain't you scared of haints? We laughed. Haints, hot steams, incantations, secret signs had vanished with our years as mist with sunrise. What was that old thing? Jem said. Angel bright, life and death. Get off the road, don't suck my breath. Cut it out now, I said. We were in front of the Radley place. Jem said, Boo must not be at home. Listen. High above us in the darkness, a solitary mocker poured out his repertoire in blissful unawareness of whose tree he sat in, plunging from the shrill kee-kee of the sunflower bird to the irascible quack of a blue jay, to the sad lament of boo, boo, boo. We turned the corner, and I tripped on a root growing in the road. Jem tried to help me, but all he did was drop my costume in the dust. I didn't fall, though, and soon we were on our way again. We turned off the road and entered the schoolyard. It was pitch black. How do you know where we're at, Jem? I asked, when we had gone a few steps. I can tell we're under the big oak because we're passing through a cool spot. Careful now, and don't fall again. We had slowed to a cautious gait, and we were feeling our way forward so as not to bump into the tree. The tree was a single and ancient oak. 2 children could not reach around its trunk and touch hands. It was far away from teachers, their spies, and curious neighbors. It was near the Radley lot, but the Radleys were not curious. A small patch of earth beneath its branches was packed hard from many fights and furtive crap games. The lights in the high school auditorium were blazing in the distance, but they blinded us if anything. Don't look ahead, Scout, Jem said. Look at the ground and you won't fall. You should have brought the flashlight, Jem. Didn't know it was this dark. Didn't look like it'd be this dark earlier in the evening. So cloudy, that's why. It'll hold off a while, though. Someone leaped at us. God almighty, Jem yelled. A circle of light burst in our faces, and Cecil Jacobs jumped in glee behind it. Ha ha ha, gotcha, he shrieked. Thought you'd be coming along this way. What are you doing way out here by yourself, boy? Ain't you scared of Boo Radley? Cecil had ridden safely to the auditorium with his parents, hadn't seen us, then had ventured down this far because he knew good and well we'd be coming along. He thought Mr. Finch would be with us, though. Shucks, ain't much but around the corner, said Jem. Who's scared to go around the corner? We had to admit that Cecil was pretty good, though. He had given us a fright, and he could tell it all over the schoolhouse. That was his privilege. Say, I said, ain't you a cow tonight? Where's your costume? It's up behind the stage, he said. Mrs. Merriweather says the pageant ain't coming on for a while. You could put yours back of the stage by mine, Scout, and we can go with the rest of them. This was an excellent idea, Jem thought. He also thought it a good thing that Cecil and I would be together. This way, Jem would be left to go with his people his own age. When we reached the auditorium, the whole town was there except Atticus and the ladies worn out from decorating, and the usual outcasts and shut-ins. Most of the county, it seemed, was there. The hall was teeming with slicked-up country people. The high school building had a wide downstairs hallway. People milled around booths that had been installed along each side. Oh, Jem, I forgot my money, I sighed when I saw them. Atticus didn't, Jem said. Here's 30 cents. You could do 6 things. See you later on. Okay, I said, quite content with 30 cents and Cecil. I went with Cecil down to the front of the auditorium, through a door on one side and backstage. I got rid of my ham costume and departed in a hurry, for Mrs. Merriweather was standing at a lectern in front of the first row of seats, making last-minute frenzied changes in the script. How much money you got? I asked Cecil. Cecil had 30 cents too, which made us even. We squandered our first nickels on the House of Horrors, which scared us not at all. We entered the black 7th grade room and were led around by the temporary ghoul in residence, and were made to touch several objects alleged to be component parts of a human being. Here's his eyes, we were told when we touched 2 peeled grapes on a saucer. Here's his heart. which felt like raw liver. These are his innards, and our hands were thrust into a plate of cold spaghetti. Cecil and I visited several booths. We each bought a sack of Mrs. Judge Taylor's homemade divinity. I wanted to bob for apples, but Cecil said it wasn't sanitary. His mother said he might catch something from everybody's heads having been in the same tub. Ain't anything round town now to catch, I protested, but Cecil said his mother said it was unsanitary to eat after folks. I later asked Aunt Alexandra about this, and she said people who held such views were usually climbers. We were about to purchase a blob of taffy when Mrs. Merriweather's runners appeared and told us to go backstage. It was time to get ready. The auditorium was filling with people. The Macomb County High School band had assembled in front below the stage. The stage footlights were on, and the red velvet curtain rippled and billowed from the scurrying going on behind it. Backstage, Cecil and I found the narrow hallway teeming with people. Adults in homemade three-corner hats, Confederate caps, Spanish-American war hats, and World War helmets. Children dressed as various agricultural enterprises crowded around the one small window. "Somebody's mashed my costume!" I wailed in dismay. Mrs. Merriweather galloped to me, reshaped the chicken wire, and thrust me inside. "You all right in there, Scout?" asked Cecil. "You sound so far off, like you was on the other side of a hill." "You don't sound any nearer," I said. The band played the national anthem, and we heard the audience rise. Then the bass drum sounded. Mrs. Merriweather, stationed behind her lectern beside the band, said, "Macomb County ad astra per aspera." The bass drum boomed again. "That means," said Mrs. Merriweather, translating for the rustic elements, "from the mud to the stars." She added unnecessarily, it seemed to me, "a pageant." "Reckon they wouldn't know what it was if she didn't tell 'em," whispered Cecil, who was immediately shushed. "The whole town knows it," I breathed. "For the country folks will come in," Cecil said. "Be quiet back there," the man's voice ordered, and we were silent. The bass drum went boom with every sentence Mrs. Merriweather uttered. She chanted mournfully about Macomb County being older than the state, that it was part of Mississippi and Alabama territories, that the first white man to set foot in the virgin forests was the probate judge's great-grandfather 5 times removed, who was never heard of again. Then came the fearless Colonel Macomb, for whom the county was named. Andrew Jackson appointed him to a position of authority, and Colonel Macomb's misplaced self-confidence and slender sense of direction brought disaster to all who rode with him in the Creek Indian Wars. Colonel Macomb persevered in his efforts to make the region safe for democracy, but his first campaign was his last. His orders, relayed to him by a friendly Indian runner, were to move south. After consulting a tree to ascertain from its lichen which way was south, and taking no lip from the subordinates who ventured to correct him, Colonel Macomb set out on a purposeful journey to rout the enemy and entangle his troops so far northwest in the forest primeval that they were eventually rescued by settlers moving inland. Mrs. Merriweather gave a 30-minute description of Colonel Macomb's exploits. I discovered that if I bent my knees, I could tuck them under my costume and more or less sit. I sat down, listened to Mrs. Merriweather's drone and the bass drum's boom, and was soon fast asleep. They said later that Mrs. Merriweather was putting her all into the grand finale, that she had crooned, "Pork!" with a confidence born of pine trees and butter beans entering on cue. She waited a few seconds, then called, "Pork!" When nothing materialized, she yelled, "Pork!" I must have heard her in my sleep, or the band playing Dixie woke me. But it was when Mrs. Merriweather triumphantly mounted the stage with the state flag that I chose to make my entrance. Chose is incorrect. I thought I'd better catch up with the rest of them. They told me later that Judge Taylor went out behind the auditorium and stood there slapping his knees so hard Mrs. Taylor brought him a glass of water and one of his pills. Mrs. Merriweather seemed to have a hit. Everybody was cheering so, but she caught me backstage and told me I had ruined her pageant. She made me feel awful. But when Jim came to fetch me, he was sympathetic. He said he couldn't see my costume much from where he was sitting. How he could tell I was feeling bad under my costume, I don't know. But he said I did all right. Just came in a little late, that was all. Jem was becoming almost as good as Atticus at making you feel right when things went wrong. Almost. Not even Jem could make me go through that crowd, and he consented to wait backstage with me until the audience left. "You want to take it off, Scout?" he asked. "No, I'll just keep it on," I said. I could hide my mortification under it. "You all want to ride home?" somebody asked. "No, sir, thank you." I heard Jem say. It's just a little walk. Be careful of Hanks, the voice said. Better still tell the Hanks to be careful of Scout. There aren't many folks left now, Jem told me. Let's go. We went through the auditorium to the hallway, then down the steps. It was still black dark. The remaining cars were parked on the other side of the building, and their headlights were little help. If some of them were going in our direction, we could see better, said Jem. Here, Scout, let me hold on to your hog. You might lose your balance. I can see all right. Yeah, but you might lose your balance. I felt a slight pressure on my head and assumed that Jem had grabbed that end of the ham. You got me? Uh-huh. We began crossing the black schoolyard, straining to see our feet. Jem, I said, I forgot my shoes. They're back behind the stage. Well, let's go get them. But as we turned around, the auditorium lights went off. You can get them tomorrow, he said. But tomorrow's Sunday, I protested as Jem turned me homeward. You can let the janitor let you in. Scout? Nothing. Jem hadn't started that in a long time. I wondered what he was thinking. He'd tell me when he wanted to, probably when we got home. I felt his fingers press the top of my costume. Too hard, it seemed. I shook my head. Jem, you don't have to hush a minute, Scout, he said, pinching me. We walked along silently. Minute's up, I said. What you thinking about? I turned to look at him, but his outline was barely visible. Thought I heard something, he said. Stop a minute. He stopped. Hear anything? He asked. No. We had not gone 5 paces before he made me stop again. Jem, are you trying to scare me? You know I'm too old. Be quiet, he said. And I knew he was not joking. The night was still. I could hear his breath coming easily beside me. Occasionally there was a sudden breeze that hit my bare legs, but it was all that remained of a promised windy night. This was the stillness before a thunderstorm. We listened. I heard an old dog just then, I said. It's not that, Jem answered. I hear it when we're walking along, but when we stop, I don't hear it. You hear my costume rustling? Oh, it's just Halloween got you. I said it more to convince myself than Jem, for sure enough, as we began walking, I heard what he was talking about. It was not my costume. It's just old Cecil, said Jem presently. He won't get us again. Let's don't let him think we're hurrying. We slowed to a crawl. I asked Jem how Cecil could follow us in the dark. It looked to me like he'd bump into us from behind. I can see you, Scout, Jem said. How? I can't see you. Your fat streaks are showing. Mrs. Crenshaw painted them with some of that shiny stuff so they'd show up under the footlights. I can see it pretty well, and I'm expecting Cecil can see you well enough to keep his distance. I would show Cecil that we knew he was behind us, and we were ready for him. Cecil Jacobs is a big red hen, I yelled suddenly, turning around. We stopped. There was no acknowledgement save hen bouncing off the distant schoolhouse wall. I'll get him, said Jem. Hey! Hey! Woo! Answered the schoolhouse wall. It was unlike Cecil to hold out for so long. Once he'd pull a joke, he'd repeat it time and again. We should have been left out already. Jim signaled for me to stop again. He said softly, Scout, can you take that thing off? I think so, but I ain't got anything on under it much. I've got your dress here. I can't get it on in the dark. Okay, he said. Never mind. Jim, are you afraid? No. Think we're almost to the tree now. A few yards from that, we'll be to the road. We could see the street light then. Jem was talking in an unhurried, flat, toneless voice. I wondered how long he would try to keep the Cecil myth going. You reckon we ought to sing, Jem? No. Be real quiet again, Scout. We had not increased our pace. Jem knew as well as I that it was difficult to walk fast without stumping a toe, tripping on stones, and other inconveniences, and I was barefooted. Maybe it was the wind rustling the trees, but there wasn't any wind, and there weren't any trees, except the big oak.